It was last July that I got the opportunity to hike the Adirondack Trail with my best friend Mark. Unlike me, Mark is an outdoorsman. He has experience camping heavy bush, whereas I barely have experience camping in my backyard. Our plan was to spend a month hiking the trail, while the few weeks prior we spent getting prepared for the adventure that lie ahead. The night before we were set to leave, we packed our gear in our duffel bags, making sure we had everything we would need for our trip. Mark ruffles through my bag and pulls out a can of bear pepper spray. "Luke, are you serious?" Mark said, as a grin starts to form from the sides of his mouth. "What?" I said. "I'd rather be safe than sorry. You don't know what's out there, man," I said. My mind immediately wanders to thoughts of sleeping inside my tent and hearing an unfamiliar sound somewhere deep in the forest. As Mark finishes ragging on me about the bear pepper spray, we both get a notification on our phones at the same time. It's an alert for a missing person. Thinking of getting one last good night's sleep in my bed, I say goodnight to my buddy and I go to bed. The next day we arrive at the trailhead, and layers of towering trees surround us from all sides. The intimidating surroundings only further ensure my anxiety about this trip. We shake hands and continue on down the trail, knowing the long journey ahead. About 3 hours into the hike, my stomach turning as I reach into my bag to grab a Cliff Bar. As I'm taking a bite, I hear Mark shriek a few yards ahead of me. Knowing Mark is not the type to get spooked from anything in the woods, this scream was all the more frightening. I look up at him, noticing his gaze fixed upon a dark figure far out and off the trail, seeming to be up in the trees. I freeze, not even to finish swallowing the piece of granola I was chewing on. Mark tells me to stay quiet and stay behind him. We walk slowly and quietly, creep up closer to whatever this thing is. As we get closer, I notice blood is covering this thing. Walking a little closer now, we realize it's a dead black bear, and it isn't climbing the tree either. It was placed there, almost as a prize or trophy for whatever had killed it, and left it there in such a horrific way. "Damn hunters, what is wrong with people?" said Mark under his breath. "A human did this? Why?" I asked. "I don't know, but let's keep moving." While I continued to walk the trail in silence, I couldn't help but try and make conversation to inquire about why we just saw a 400-pound dead bear hung from a tree branch. "Hey Mark, you alright?" I asked softly. Mark doesn't respond. Instead, he makes faint breathing sounds, like he's sleeping, but he's obviously not. He's just walking, ignoring me. "Mark, what's wrong, dude?" The silence continues. I'm walking behind him. I'm unable to see his face. I can hear him talking under his breath, repeating, "Mark, you alright? Mark, you alright?" It's safe to say I was completely freaked out, but I gave him some walking distance, figuring he is just as freaked out as I am after seeing that 400-pound tree ornament. About an hour passes as I drift off into thought of my personal life, my job, and daydreaming about my future. As the sun begins to set, I suddenly come to the realization that I let Mark walk way too far ahead, and I don't remember how long ago I've actually had him in my view. A huge rush of adrenaline goes through me as the scenery gets darker, and I'm realizing I'm relying on Mark to be my outdoors guide, as I know little about navigating through the woods. I began to run down the trail, yelling Mark's name as loud as I can, wondering how we could have possibly have drifted this far apart from each other. "Mark! Yo! Hello!" My throat becomes swole as I've been yelling for him for about an hour as I'm jogging through the woods, and my voice is breaking. Exhausted, I set my pack down. eat another granola bar, and start setting up my tent in preparation for the long night ahead. I use my phone as a light beacon so Mark would be able to find the campsite, but this is to my detriment as it's losing battery fast. And as the night sky gets darker, the sounds of the forest come alive. Different insect clicks and chirps, hoots and howls, most of which I'm unfamiliar with. As I watch the time go by minute, I'm losing more and more hope that I'll not have to camp alone in the woods by myself. With the last remaining 10% of battery, I walk the perimeter of the campsite, hoping to hear a familiar sound, like a human voice or a car alarm or anything. But instead, I'm met with the realization that not only am I alone, but while I was searching for Mark, I veered off the trail, making my map useless, as Mark had the compass. It's about 1:30 a.m. when my battery finally dies, and a feeling of dread begins to seep into my thoughts. I crawl inside my tent, into my sleeping bag, as I listen to all the nighttime creatures, trying to single out each sound and figure out which animal is making them. My eyes slowly close as I fade into sleep after an exhausting day, and in the faint distance, I hear a person scream out. I shoot up to my feet inside the tent, not knowing if what I heard was real or my exhausted mind playing tricks. Either way, I step out of the tent, and as loud as my broken voice can muster, I yell, "Hello, is anyone there?" I heard only the sounds of insects chirping. After a few moments later, I hear it again, yet there was something off about it. As my instincts are telling my body to run, I can't help but notice that scream was the exact same scream as I heard the first time, like it was a recording of the same scream being repeated over again. It frightened me to my bone, to say the least. I crawl back in my sleeping bag and close my eyes, clinging on to hope that all this is some kind of nightmare. 5 minutes pass, and I lay there, staring at the tent wall, as my fight or flight instincts kick in. I jump to my feet, grab my pack, and prepare myself for whatever is out there, making those screams. I take a gulp of water and slowly creep out of my tent, crouching all the way to the tree line. I'm ready to run in one direction until I reach a road or path, but my thoughts are halted as I see a humanoid figure at my campsite. I'm about to scream out for Mark until I see its mouth spread open from ear to ear, as wide as I've ever seen anyone open their mouth. It was so unnatural. Suddenly, it lets out a blood-curdling scream, exactly like the first two screams I heard before. I refrain from calling out Mark's name, as my instincts telling me this is not Mark. Its spine was bent, like the posture of an elderly person would have had, and as it walked around the campsite, it seemed to use its arms to hold itself up, like a person pretending to be an animal. It creeps around my tent, circling it until it stops at the tent door, then leads forward and lunges into the tent, hissing and howling, then screaming, louder than any person could have ever mustered. It seems angered that the tent was empty, like it planned on someone being in there to surprise. I could only watch as my things were being gone through and ripped apart by this thing. Once it rummaged through everything, it raised its head and started to sniff the air. At this point was the first time I could actually see it in the moonlight. It looked like its bones were close to popping out of its skin. Like picture a very skinny person, and you could see its spine bones sharply protruding from the skin on its back. It had a fast twitch, and when a raccoon made a noise, I saw the thing's head snap in its direction and go sprinting off after it. I took this opportunity to run in the opposite direction, hoping it didn't notice me. I run for what seems like hours, my legs tired from running, and my arms scraped up from pushing away the sticks and branches as I trek through the unkept wilderness. My exhaustion finally took over, and I fell to my feet in anguish. Mark, please, where are you? I muttered to myself. I then hear the noise of a raccoon in the bushes a few yards away. I really didn't think anything of it until it made the same groan again, only it sounded exactly like the first. Then it hit me. Could this thing be mimicking the sounds of its prey? Could something like this actually live out here in the wilderness undetected? The amount of sheer fear from that thought gave me a second wind, and I get up and start limping and hopping. My legs had given up, but my fear won't let me rest. I hear strange noises behind me, croaks and low guttural sounds of an unearthly creature began filling my eardrums as I heard it get closer and closer. I heard each one of its limbs crash into the brush as it made panting sounds, like a dog excited to eat its dinner. Its warm, musty breath gives me the goosebumps. I now know this is in my imagination. A last-ditch attempt to save myself, I blindly swing my arm around, hoping to strike it. And as I do, I trip on a stump and go back first onto pavement. Wait, pavement? A part of me felt a sigh of relief. I looked around, and I'm at the parking lot where we began our hike. I swing my head back to the woods and see nothing. Using all the energy I had left, I army crawled to a couple of hikers, surprised to see someone in my condition. They drove me to a local hospital where I rested and then returned home. I recount the story to my family and friends, explaining how it was impossible Mark left me and would leave me on my own. I worried he would need help or search and rescue. "Who's Mark?" my friends said. "Who's Mark?" I shouted. "Did you bump your head too? We don't know a Mark." I was dumbfounded. I couldn't have imagined this all up, nonetheless an entire friendship. I was beside myself. Apparently Mark had never existed, and I can't help but think something wanted to lure me to that forest that day.